The virtual lead marketing conference continues with its focus on loyalty engagement, analytics, and digital applications. I'm your host, John Karolowski. Thank you for joining us. We have 3 more presentations today. You can stay with us the rest of the way or just log into those presentations that interest you. Our next session is Joint Business Planning and Maximizing Trade Spend ROI. Now, this conference is interactive. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box in the lower left of your screen. We'll answer them along the way as time allows and at the end of the presentation. All registered guests will be sent a link to this presentation and all others, as well as supplementary materials early next week. Joining me now are Janet Dorncott and Kristy Gary of Relational Solutions. They have over 20 years of experience in information technology and focus on data warehousing, data integration, and business intelligence solutions. So, without further ado, here are Janet and Kristy.
Thanks, John. This is Janet Dorncott. I'm going to start off today's presentation, and then I'll turn it over to Kristy at some point. We'll be interacting together, and as John said, feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. The presentation today, as John said, is on joint business planning and maximizing trade spend ROI. Our goals for today are to define what JBPS requirements are today, discuss the win-win scenario, explain why trade planning is so critical to joint business planning, describe what retailers are actually expecting today versus what they're seeing from manufacturers, also to define the role of TPM, TPO, and TPI. And Kristy's going to run with that, and also she's going to go through some case studies and some ROI case studies for you guys. So I'll start with just a brief company background. Some of you may know who we are already, but we started the company back in 1996. I'm one of the founders, and started the company to originally specialize in data warehousing and business intelligence. And we did that across all industries initially. So we built some of the country's largest scale data warehouse implementations. We built the data warehouse for Chase Manhattan Bank, for Chrysler, Timken Industries, Xerox, and over 200 implementations. We were very well known as the company to go to for data integration and harmonization requirements. And one of the reasons why we started focusing on the consumer goods industry is because we identified this key issue in the consumer goods industry with them not only having to integrate all these outside data sources, all these inside data sources, but they also had all these outside data sources, including third-party data providers, POS data, EDI files, a variety of different data sources that we didn't see across most industries. So we found ourselves redeveloping a lot of cleansing and validation routines to integrate this data, and we found ourselves leveraging things in the data model with one company for another, and creating new calculations and creating new mappings, and thought there's a lot of what we are doing can be streamlined. So we started developing our application called POS Smart. We also now have Trade Smart. We've been recognized by most of the major database companies. We were actually on the front cover of Oracle's magazine as Developers of the Year. But we also have a great partnership with Teradata, IBM, SAP. And most recently, we've been named by CIO Review and CIO Story as one of the top 20 most promising big data companies and one of the top 100 most strategic big data solution providers. So that's just a little bit of background on who we are. And so with that, I'll just jump right into what is joint business planning. Joint business planning is a strategic relationship between the buyer and the retailer. It's not just meetings between a buyer and the category manager. In JBP planning, it's important to identify key members, including corporate leadership, support, and their involvement. Assuming this has been accomplished, it's time to begin planning. So here we just have a quick survey question. How many of your key retailers invite you to participate in JBPS? And while you're answering that, I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So retailers and manufacturers have to each basically prepare a list of their own core objectives. Leaders from both companies need to discuss each of the objectives and address why they are important to each of them. So objectives should be compared and documented. Objectives that provide the most benefit to both companies should be documented for further analysis. So compromises really need to be made in this process because both companies need to get benefit for joint business planning to work effectively. So it looks like, based on the responses so far, somewhere in the lower end, less than 10 companies are actually are the number that you're being asked to perform joint business planning with. So when considering the various objectives and plans, companies should plot their objectives based on their impact on each company and the level of difficulty and money involved in accomplishing those objectives. In this case, ROI could be calculated for any of these objectives. So depending on the ROI and your budget and time constraints, you may determine one is more likely than another to become objective one. More and more, we're seeing companies identifying their greatest ROI and understanding and managing their trade spend. And that said, many things need to be taken into consideration. In order to determine where the greatest ROI will be found, companies need to identify what data is needed to calculate the ROI for each objective they have. The data needed must be available, though. So, for example, to more accurately analyze out of stocks, POS data would be needed. So actual POS from retailers is generally preferred because it will likely have store item daily data that is the actual data and not summarized data that you might get from a third party. Figuring out if the data exists and if so, where it is and how to get it will help you determine the next step. So determining if you get it direct from the retailer or if you're going to obtain it from a third party is important. Assuming POS can be obtained, where are you going to get it from? Are you going to get it from the retailer portal? Will the retailer provide POS and EDI files? How are you going to get inventory information? Do we need to purchase the raw data from an outside source? If so, what will that cost? Other data sources also need to be identified. So depending on those objectives, those data sources may be internal, they may be external, but basically identifying that. For example, plan data would likely be internal data. Weather trend that you might be purchasing from an outside party is external data. Shipment data, forecast data, internal. Currency conversion, external. Competitive market analysis, external. This all has to be mapped out so you can determine where you want to begin. Okay, so basically, according to a survey by IGD, retailers are viewing JBP as more strategic than manufacturers are. Unfortunately, many suppliers don't really understand the difference. They still view JBP as category management meetings, but that's really not the case. Retailers are expecting manufacturers to understand the data better and provide more accurate insights. And the problem is manufacturers don't really know what the retailers want that's different than what they're already providing and how to get that data. So in this presentation, we're going to explain where we see most CPG companies and retailers getting their best ROI, and that's in trade spend. We're also going to show you what you can show them that is different than what you're showing them today. We're going to show you what they want to see and what the manufacturers should also know themselves. And we're going to show you case studies and explain the complexity and the benefits of trade promotion intelligence. So why should you want to analyze trade dollars? For most companies, it's their second highest corporate spend. Margins have been greatly compressed over the past few years due to raw material costs increasing. On top of that, revenues are flat. Companies have cut costs associated with raw materials and labor costs already, and they need to identify that next area where they can cut costs and maximize profits. So where do they turn to increase their corporate profits? The next logical step is in trade spend. So the survey question is, what percentage of revenue does your company spend on trade? And like that other chart showed, it's upwards of 15 to 20% of gross revenue is what we see for most of our customers. So if you could answer this question, we'll take a look and see what the current, what the participants here average it to be. But we are seeing it being nowadays the second highest corporate spend. So it looks like some people think it's, the majority of people, is somewhere in the 0 to 5% of revenues. That's pretty surprising. Most of our customers are saying that it's somewhere in the 10 to 20%. Some people on the call here aren't quite sure, but it looks like it's a pretty broad brush. But regardless, what we're typically seeing is that most of the customers are seeing it be a pretty significant portion of their actual revenues. So the number one challenge that we see in analyzing trade is the time required for data gathering and analysis. There simply isn't enough time to analyze the data across all retail segments. And this leads to a lack of coverage. Most companies that we're talking to today have a very high level look at how promotions are performed and only have the bandwidth to look at a handful of stores or maybe 2 to 3 key retailers. Even coverage for a single retailer is never quite complete. So analyzing and covering all promotions across all retail segments simply doesn't happen without an enterprise architecture. And we'll talk more about that in the presentation as well. But the key is integrating and aligning data at a common level for planning data, shipments, and consumption is very complex. And in most cases, it's a very manual and very human error-prone process. Is also done a lot in just Excel spreadsheets. So in addition, there's really no consistency across the different retailers. And then another challenge is clean historical data. So you might have historical data for promotions, but do you have it for shipments, consumptions, and plans? You need a truth database with factual, historical, harmonized data to really understand that. So the idea behind implementing an enterprise solution is really to provide a significant ROI to the business, because the longer it takes for people to get answers to questions, the greater the risk is that's involved. And risks include everything from losing sales to a retailer dropping you, making costly wrong decisions, providing inaccurate information, compensating the wrong sales rep, negotiating the wrong discounts for vendors, and so forth. There's just countless issues with having too little or inaccurate information, and it all costs the company money. So if a decision needs to be made and all the accurate information has not yet been gathered, then you are forced to make a hunch-based decision. And there is definitely a great deal of risk in making hunch-based decisions. Providing information to users faster will give decision makers a fact-based decision. Not only will it reduce the risk associated with guessing, it will improve the accuracy of their decision as well. It will also increase employee productivity. So time once spent gathering information and pulling all that data together will now be spent analyzing the information and providing more insight and information to decision makers. So analysts can actually analyze information rather than just spend time gathering it. There will be information available that they never had access to in the past. So they'll actually be able to discover new trends and information they never had access to in the past. So what percentage of trade spend do you have coverage for? What we typically see with our customers is somewhere in maybe the 5 to 12% range. It's not very broad, and a lot of times, even though they might have coverage on that, individual retailers, even if they're highly analyzing, say Walmart, it's not always complete coverage there either. In fact, most times it's not. So I'm going to leave the survey up for a little while so people can answer that and we can get to the survey results. And I'll just start kind of talking about the next slide, because the slide actually depicts the data dilemma that we see at consumer goods manufacturers. And it's not necessarily that they don't have the data, it's that the data's there and they're not able to leverage it. And typically we see a lot of teams going to all of these different data sources, and they might even have the impression that they're getting too much data, but that really isn't the case. The issue is having that data in a usable and reliable format. And that data comes in so many forms from different sources that it's really impossible to get the full value out of it. So most companies are using it just to produce reports that are absolutely required by the retailers, but they just don't have the time to create new insights even though the data's there. So I'll go here to the results. And yeah, it's on the lower end. Most people have 15% or lower coverage. I see a small percentage with more than 50%. Those are probably people that are already implementing a TPM and TPO application. But defining what those are and what the differences are is something that Kristy's going to do in a couple of slides here. So as I was mentioning, it's not that the data isn't there. The data's there. But business users really don't want to necessarily get into the technology. They don't want to have it explained to them why it's important to align the data and what the difficulties are involved in that. But nowadays you really have to have at least some level of understanding here. So, for example, each one of these sources provide information and even reports, but analysts spend about 80 to 90% of their time gathering and pulling together data. And that's a statistic by the Gartner Group. So inevitably, there are discrepancies in reports, and analysts are stuck spending more time trying to figure out where the numbers came from. Not only is this a very tedious task, but when people's numbers don't match, there is a lack of confidence in the data, and rightfully so. It wastes not only the analyst's time, but it also leads to wasted time on management's part when they are arguing over whose data is right, and it could potentially lead to very costly and incorrect decisions as well. And on top of that, since 90% of an analyst's time is spent gathering, cleaning, and integrating and justifying their reports, this is time that keeps analysts away from actually analyzing and gaining new insights from that data. And that's why an enterprise solution is needed that offers companies a fast ROI so that we can streamline this process and actually make them freed up to actually get more information out of the data that exists. So POS data that exists in files all over the place, they still need to be obtained. So you're either obtaining them from the retailer or a third party. When identifying the data sources needed to meet your objective, the following items really need to be considered. We actually have a spreadsheet that we offer to help identify the different data sources, the types, the volumes, and so forth. But some key things to take away here are some things you want to know about your data. You're going to want to identify whether or not that data exists and whether it's internal or external. You're going to want to document whether that data is readily available on the database internally and where it resides and in what format. You want to determine the needs, if the data needs to be purchased, and if so, how much is it going to cost you? How much history is available from each of the sources, what the data elements are that are available. You're going to want to document the formats that they're coming in. You're also going to want to consider calendar weeks or the calendars, the retail calendars, your internal calendars, your weekend dates. There's all sorts of considerations related to the calendars, discussing how those dates will be aligned, the frequency of the data, the granularity of the data issues that could occur, and you're going to want to estimate data volumes. So along with that, you're also going to want to identify and define business rules and calculations that are needed. So all those things need to be discussed to determine the obstacles related to each of the objectives and how they are related to the complexity involved. But the result is a far more productive environment for both the analysts as well as for management. And in addition, you have more access to reliable information than you've had available in the past. So this data will help you know more about your business, provide more value to your management, understand your customers better, and provide more insights to generate more profits for both you and for your retailer. So the question is, do you feel your company has sufficient resources for trade spend analysis? And like I mentioned earlier, when 90% of their time is actually spent gathering and validating and pulling all that data into spreadsheets, inevitably those analysts are also stuck going back to the drawing board and then justifying where their numbers came from. So for most companies, at least from what we see, the analysts, there's just not enough of them. And we see that everywhere we go. There's just not nearly enough. Not to get full coverage. We've never been into an account that says we have too many analysts.
Not like we have that happening here either.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, I'll show you. I'll wait just a couple more seconds for responses. But most analysts actually asked us for a picture of that earlier slide that kind of depicts the issues that they're running into, because they need to explain to their management. A lot of times management doesn't understand how complex it is for analysts to go in and pull together this information. But when you consider everything that they're pulling in, and when you consider all of the different hierarchies and calendar issues and formatting issues, the different data elements that are coming in, it's an extremely complex process to do on a manual basis. And it looks like
we had a question come in, Janet. We had a question come in just now regarding the poll question. I don't understand the question.
You don't understand the question?
That's what the question was, yes.
So Janet had gone through, all of the ways that analysts today spend their time, grabbing the data and harmonizing it and putting together for reporting. The question really related to, do you feel that you have enough resources at your organization to cover off doing the trade spend analysis that you need to do in order to be truly collaborative partners with your retailers.
Right. And one of the things is, too, and what we're seeing, and let's just get to the results so we can check that out, too. But for the person that doesn't understand that question, when we go into accounts and we talk with trade teams, they are usually very frustrated because they don't have the time or the bandwidth to access and to really have full coverage. So they view, they obviously view themselves as not only do they not have enough time, but neither do the other analysts. And that's why we see most companies having coverage that are, less than 20% in most cases. So it's no surprise here that the results are showing that 66%, over 66% of the respondents here say that they don't have nearly enough resources for trade spend analysis. So resources, basically what we're referring to are the actual individuals, but it also can mean, just the tools needed as well. So that's pretty sure. I mean, that's pretty much reflective of what we see in the industry too. So ideally, a first phase would involve an initiative that delivers the greatest ROI with the least amount of difficulty. And it's important in any case to have a proper data architecture in place that will provide you with the structure to easily add new data, as well as provide you with accurate and reliable data from all necessary data sources right from the onset. So companies need to consider competitors, the economy, the challenges and benefits when embarking on JBP initiatives. And JBP is not just a single project. It is a commitment by both the retailer and the supplier to cooperatively increase profits, improve their business relationship, streamline efficiencies, and ultimately service the end customer better. So you need to understand that investments will need to be made by both parties to do this effectively. And depending on the initiative selected first, your requirements will vary. However, there are certain measures that we recommend that create a very fast and measurable ROI for both the retailer and the CPG manufacturers. And as I mentioned before, with raw material costs increasing, most companies have already cut costs in that area. Additionally, most companies have already cut employee costs. So the next highest area of spend for companies is marketing in most cases, and most companies cannot clearly identify which promotions are actually working and which aren't. They also can't clearly identify at which retailers or stores they're accurately working. So coverage is very low today. The bandwidth simply doesn't exist for analysts to manually pull together all the needed information to learn how all those stores are doing and how all those promotions are doing. And for this reason, investing in integrating the right data will really streamline this process. But certain data sources are required in order to determine what's working for both the retailer and CPG manufacturers. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kristy. She's going to discuss trade promotion management, trade intelligence, and trade promotion optimization, and how it delivers fast ROI that should be shared in joint business planning sessions. So Kristy is up.
So really kind of going through what is, joint business planning and why do we care, and why are Janet and I focused on the trade component of that. And really, trade is the one place, trade spend monies is the one place where the manufacturer is funding activity at retail, and they should have mutually beneficial results. It's not just to help the retailers increase their sales at any cost. It is to look and see, what's beneficial for both parties. So to level set, what TPM is, trade promotion management. It's defined as the upfront process of creating your trade promotion plans. It's really a planning system. There's lots of applications out there today, such as SAP, Siebel, Oracle, IBM. A lot of people are still doing it in Excel spreadsheets. Some folks just, on the golf course on the back of a napkin. Typical users of an application like this would be sales reps, your marketing, or your trade team. And there's some weaknesses that go along with this is to, really very little exposure to what is successful. It relies on a hunch factor. There's really no understanding of what the outcomes are. So, a lot of times is we do this with our retailer because we did it last year, and there's no ROI analysis when you can't automate it. So really, what are you currently using for TPM? Do you have something today?
So basically, what we typically see is people either have something homegrown or to mantra. I think okay.
Yeah, I see that a lot. A lot of what's being done is still going in Excel spreadsheets, and there's a lot of risk involved with that. Your spreadsheet can get too big. There's no business rules that are applied to that. Sharing best practices and knowledge across the organization really makes it difficult to be strategic business partners with your retailers and share those insights that you gain. If we were to, get into trade promotion, what we've coined as trade promotion intelligence, where you have the ability to leverage your enterprise solution, that you have automating the integration of reporting, and gathering all the data, and to bring all those analytics together in one place that you can feed other systems, leverage a common repository, generate those insights across time. So, and then the next place to go really, so you have trade promotion management, the place that you hold all your plans. Trade promotion intelligence, as we saw, over 60% of companies still doing that in Excel spreadsheets. And then, to go from there to trade promotion optimization, and what are you currently doing with that? Like, how do you take the information and the results of what you did and put that into a predictive model to achieve, better results, the next time? And what we're hearing from the industry is that only about 1% of all consumer packaged goods companies are implementing a TPO. And it's just due to the complexities of actually getting the data harmonized, gathered, and put into a repository that can feed a system. So again, trade promotion intelligence leverages automation, integration, and harmonization of various trade components in order to accurately measure ROI. It automates the analytics solution that lets you start measuring promotion performance as the promotion's going on. No trade analyst got into the business in order to, be in what I would coin spreadsheet hell, just trying to gather the data and integrate it and put it together and justify what am I looking at, and can we trust this information, and how repeatable is that? So really automating that is the key. It brings together your promotion plans, shipments, and consumption as it relates to all your trade promotions. The promotion plans, as we saw, over 60% in Excel. They could be coming from an application as well. But really, even the best laid plans need some tweaking. So you make a plan, you execute, that can be stated, for the full year. And as the execution comes in, maybe a truck was late. Maybe the retailer couldn't get it on an end cap as expected. And you have to make some adjustments to those plans. This will offer you the ability to accurately analyze, align everything together so that you are looking at true ROI of the execution, not just what the plan was.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important to point out here, Kristy, on your slide is historical. By having a common repository of that information, they'll have access to the historical promotions, and they'll also be able to leverage that for other areas of the business, like supply chain or category management.
Absolutely. So what do you need in order to get to trade intelligence? So you have to have a rule-based system and allow us for that streamlined process where those ROI calculations are consistent and accurate across the entire organization. In an Excel spreadsheet, everybody can be doing an ROI calculation differently. Process-driven, the capabilities allow visibility to non-compliant events, what's working, what's not working. The insight into the planned spending versus the retail execution by event, product group, all the way through the hierarchy. Using cost information to understand your true margins and the margin contribution. And I think this is critical in addition to the shipments. We're not just looking at what's good for the retailer. We're looking at win-win scenarios for both. And the ability to provide the visibility to historical pricing and look at, protecting against margin erosion, and knowing your sell-through. And an everyday product, we're not really talking about sell-through, but how much are you shipping that isn't being pulled through on this promotion, so you're really just subsidizing your base, and that's costing you some money there. Again, I'll talk about this all the time. Shipments are very key in order to be truly collaborative with your retail partners, you have to have the whole picture. And just their revenue or their sales through the front door and what they're making on the product doesn't show truly what win-win scenarios would be. What are your margins? How far can you afford to discount? Are you subsidizing too much of your base and causing erosion in non-promoted weeks? Are you subsidizing unnecessarily?
Yeah, and I would add that don't you think this is the one area where in joint JBPS, in the joint business planning sessions, retailers are expecting this kind of information. And like Kristy said, right now people are using consumption data to report back to retailers. They're not taking it to the next level, and it's a very educational process for us to explain why shipments and cost of goods sold are key, because in joint business planning, it should be a win-win for both companies. And I love Kristy's next slide here because that really explains it.
Bring that one home. So when you have these conversations, if you're looking at consumption only, there are certain KPIs you have no visibility to. So you can look at, how much was consumed, what did that retailer make, so you know how much you sold it to them for, how much they're selling it for, so you can calculate, their profit, their lift, if you will, and, retailer ROI, which in the first side, if you're looking at consumption only, you're seeing, okay, well, look, the retailer made 55 points on this promotion. If you look at shipments and say they had to bring in 1,000 units in order to get 500 in sales, and you charged them, $2 per unit, they paid $2,000. They may have sold this product for $450, so they made $22.50, but their margin is a lot thinner. They do obviously have the opportunity to sell the balance of those units in other weeks, but then again, your margins have been lowered. And the other thing here is that retailers aren't in the business of representing your brand. They're in the business of selling an assortment to the consumer. So they may not care if your product's on the shelf or it's in the back room. They'd take that money gladly and put it in the bank. So it's incumbent upon you to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. So next couple here, we're going to take you through some case studies. Category teams presenting trade promotion results with the retailer. They need to understand what promotions were working and which ones need some adjustment. There's a report here with traffic lighting in order to easily see the areas that are working. So again, we're looking for places where it's a win-win. So here we have a winner for the retailer, but a loser for the supplier. Here we have a win for the supplier, but a loser for the retailer. These are the types of events, that you do not want to repeat. Even if it's a win for the retailer here, if you're losing margin, you don't want to repeat that. So you're really trying to find those places where it's a win for both parties and move forward with that.
Yeah, and this is a great picture because those arrows, you'll notice they're only pointing up if it was profitable for both the CPG manufacturer and for the retailer. And this is really what that joint initiative is all about. Your company wants to be able to make sure that it's a profitable situation for both of you. Otherwise, that relationship won't last if you're running promotions that are only profitable for the retailer too.
Absolutely. Here's another view of similar data when we're looking at, sales and lift by week, year over year. A nice way to look at your base versus your incremental, and making sure that you're looking at shipments right next to your consumption. Obviously, shipments lead consumption. We know that. But as you eyeball, what would I have gotten anyways? Where does my lift come in? And is that the best thing I can do for my organization and my partnership for the retailer? In the next case study, marketing would like to determine whether having a product on promotion cannibalizes other products in its category. In order to do this, a bump chart is required that depicts both volume and price for themselves and others. Again, I said the retailer represents lots of brands. They want to make sure they're not growing your sales at the risk of their whole category. So taking a look at a bump chart is a great way to understand if the cannibalization is happening across brands. How does price impact your volume? So you can see in this chart when buns are cannibalized when biscuits are promoted. So when you see the price decline on the line chart here, and then the bars showing the volume spikes. So obviously the price drops, the volume goes up, but what's happened in this green line is that every time buns or biscuits are promoted, buns sell a little bit less. Do you guys, in your companies, do you currently use baseline? And if so, what is that? I'll give you a minute.
Yeah, a lot of times we see companies buying third-party baselines. Sometimes they create them themselves. Sometimes they're, it says FITA, finger in the air, because we hear that from a lot of customers, actually. Okay. So it really varies. I'd say probably most of our customers are using baselines from syndicated data providers like Nielsen or IRI, but it varies. There's also third-party providers like Sequoia and others that are out there providing baselines too.
Yeah, it looks like more than half are using a syndicated provider. Yep. Obviously baseline sales are sales that you would expect in the absence of promotion, and it's a key component in understanding your ROI of your trade spend dollars, because you don't want to subsidize your base. You want to know, what would I get in the absence of a promotion? Really determine the effectiveness of your tactics. Very key ingredient is what is that incremental, and feeling confident. And we know that there is some challenges to having that syndicated data just based on the algorithm out there, that after 7 weeks, that's your new price. So if you have a new EDLP initiative, after 7 weeks, you kind of lose that visibility to what was base and what is incremental. Having the ability, even in the slide before, to look at that bump chart and be able to adjust that as needed. So again, baseline, looking at this bump chart here, base versus incremental. You don't want to have wild variations in your baseline data. That's given seasonality and whatnot, it should be relatively stable. And it should be extendable to all retail segments. So, food, drug, mass, your category killers like Home Depot and Lowe's, your club stores. Different ways you can get this information. You can provide disaggregated data, trended from the store level up, as in IRI or Nielsen, or others that are aggregated at the chain or banner level. What we reiterate is that there are lots of ways to get baseline. We have a model. You see the syndicated providers have it. All of you either have that you're using the syndicated, or you have a homegrown system, or you leverage your gut instinct. But that having the baseline correct is critical in order to determine the return on incremental sales, the return on investment for your promotions. And incremental is all calculated from where your baseline is.
And I think your key bullet there, you need to have one that you're most comfortable with, one that you feel is the most accurate. So whether you're buying it from a third party, building one on your own, whatever it might happen to be, not only should you be comfortable with it and feel confident in it, but in an enterprise architecture, you should be able to use whatever you're most comfortable with. So if you prefer to buy that from a third party, or if you prefer to use something on your own, the reason that this is important is if you have an enterprise solution, you're all going to standardize on a baseline, and now you'll have an architecture that will leverage the one you're most comfortable with, and that your business will actually create the most accurate results from.
Great. It's very important to pick with one that you're comfortable. Stick with one that you're comfortable with, and use that going forward. Don't keep jumping around and whatnot. So it looks like we have a question. Do we create different baselines for adjustments for slow-moving items like cosmetics or for seasonality? Absolutely. And in our solution, we also allow for the trade analyst to adjust the baseline based on those things that they know that your people resources can't be replaced by a machine. So the ability to override that base by looking at your bump chart, by knowing what's going on, potentially your incremental volume is driven by some other event like a hurricane coming up the coast, and all of a sudden sales go through the roof. Might not have anything to do with actual promotional events. So yes, that is customizable, and you can have different rules for different categories or different product groups or at different times of the year. Your integration and harmonization is key. We've already kind of gone through this. You have lots of complicated data sources. All have to be integrated. And then, agreed on what the KPIs are, for your organization. To look at ROI, your lift, your margin and contribution, that all activity is fully aligned and accurate. Again, you might have something planned to start July 1st, and a truck was late, or the retailer couldn't get their merchandisers to put it on the end cap, and it didn't really start until July 5th. So the best laid plans need room for adjustment. And then, that it's updated as the data comes in. There's no latency. So if you buy your sales from a syndicated provider, they come in monthly. That's the update. If you have, store level POS data from the retailer that you have today from yesterday, that is, automated all the way through. And then you have one database, which is the one version of the truth. And you can not only, have your standard reporting, but also a lot of ad hoc querying ability to answer those questions that you couldn't answer today because you don't know the places you could go with the information you have.
Yeah, on top of it, being able to leverage that data to feed back that information into your TPM applications that you may already have, or to some other planning application. We've got a couple of them listed here. But other applications can also leverage that cleaned up data. So by having an enterprise solution, you're able to support many groups within the organization.
The real goal is to fine-tune your promotions, create those win-win scenarios for you and your retail partners. And in order to do that, you have to, like we said, integrate your planning data with the sales data, with the shipment data, with the cost, grouping up your promoted products into events at retail. So taking it from your planning record, which could have multiple records for one retail executable event. So, I have a back-to-school display that may have, circular spend and an end cap slotting fee and a temporary price reduction as well. So there might be 3 entries in my planning system that I need to group into one event at retail, align those with the dates that they'll actually happen with the sales, have the ability to override your base and incremental by event as you look at seasonality and product group and other things going on in the competitive environment. And we really look at allocating your trade spend dollars to the consumed unit. So you're not going to talk to a retailer and tell them to move their sales around to match up to your spend. You have to find where you have units sold, what spend goes to that in order to not double count your units. We really have the discipline to look at spend holistically. So this is just a nice picture of a trade promotion intelligence alignment tool that we offer, where we're taking the records here that come from your promotional system, grouping them by event type, EDLP, EDLC, high-low, all other. Maybe you have some, golf outing or slotting fees that really aren't driven event volume lift, but you have to add that into customer profitability. And then you can bring those into consumer-facing events. You have the nice visualization here of your pricing and the volume. And you can have this for yourself and your competitors. You can just look at yourself. So you can adjust the dates as needed from what was on the original planning record to what actually happened. And a nice visual Gantt chart at the bottom to show where you have overlay. So you might have an EDLP running, and you have a hybrid customer where you have some high-lows happening at the same time. So you're going to get the volume you're going to get for your EDLP. You have spend that's associated with that, but then you have incremental spend associated with that high-low activity. So.
Yeah, and the key there is really to make sure that your trade promotion intelligence is accurate. So when you're sharing information with the retailer, you want to make sure that you're sharing accurate information.
So do you guys currently have a trade spend ROI initiative?
Yeah, we're seeing that being a pretty hot area these days, whether it's related to TPM or TPO or just TPI, whatever it might
Or
be.
joint business planning, and where's the first place you start when you talk to your retail partners?
Right.
And are you truly partnering?
Right, exactly. So maybe we'll watch the results come in. Looks like, you know what, it looks like there's a significant number who do. So it looks like about 40% of companies on this call, at least, do have trade initiatives right now, especially to analyze trade spend ROI. That's pretty common. It's what we're seeing in the industry. So what do you do next? How do you get to that point where you're actually able to provide that information in your joint business planning sessions? Well, like we said, you have to sit down with your retailer and understand what each of your objectives are. So you want to analyze or evaluate your needs. You want to see what your annual trade spend budget is. What is your company's commitment to improving trade spend ROI? And how much time do you currently spend doing that? It's important also to understand your coverage and to talk with the analysts in your organization to understand what they feel your coverage is. But the key here is once you start doing that and understanding the importance of measuring that ROI and the impact it'll have on your company, we generally start with a roadmap, and we recommend you do the same. So basically understanding what your current methods are. Well, how are you currently gathering this data? How many promotions are being run? And do you have historical data available? Understanding the different granularity and business rules that apply. Talking the same talk with your retailers, making sure that you're on the same page with defining what your business rules are as well as what their business rules are. Your current metrics, how are they calculated today? How are you using a standard baseline across your company, or are people using whatever they feel they should be using? What's the current coverage? Typically when we do a roadmap, we conduct something called a gap analysis, and we basically look at what you're currently doing, and we compare that with what you should likely be doing and a roadmap to kind of get you to where you need to be. So you want to lay out those steps that are required, and you want to evaluate your current infrastructure to determine, in order to provide this objective with my retailer, what data sources will be needed, and do we have it available? And if those data sources are available, how complicated is it going to be to access that data and then also to integrate that data? So this is a very high-level picture here, but it looks like we've got a question about do you create different baselines for, do you integrate consumer data to determine whether shoppers buy adjacent items or other categories possibly attributed to your promotion?
That's all part of what we would gather in the roadmap here. So lots of data can be integrated together, and of course you know that it has to be at the least common denominator, but that is something that we have done in the past, and depending on your needs, we could customize how does that look for your organization in the future. So part of that best practices between your current method and what we've seen out there and how to get all that laid out together.
Yeah, and for your organization, again, determining what that objective is and which data sources you might need for that is really going to be key. So that's why in architecture, because every initiative is a little bit different. Every company we talk with is, they might have a different project going in marketing than another marketing program, or sometimes it's supply chain. Supply chain might come and have an initiative and a purpose for integrating POS. Same with finance or category management. So identifying where the greatest need is, but every company has a different impetus for implementing an enterprise solution for integrating POS. So some of the architecture fundamentals you need to keep in mind is to have a consistent method for integrating that data. And basically there is a staging area that requires you to align and validate that data, to apply your business rules, where you're aligning your different retailer information with your internal data. We typically recommend something called the STAR schema. That's part of a data model. It's a pretty commonly accepted data model in the business intelligence world. One of the reasons we recommend that is it lends very nicely to the ability for integrating new data sources down the road. With a STAR schema, for example, you can also down the road integrate social media data, for example. We've got examples of that. We've got examples of clickstream analysis and the ability to integrate e-commerce data. So there's new data sources today that were not available 10 years ago when we were implementing some of our solutions, yet companies are leveraging that solution. So making sure that you understand the right architecture is very important. Also understanding what kind of database you might need. There are MPP platforms out there that are absolutely fantastic, Teradata, Netezza, there's a variety of them, and then also relational databases too. So it's important to have some basic understanding of the architecture requirements. The joint business benefits, we talked about this throughout the presentation here. So we're including this as part of the presentation to kind of give people just a reminder of those joint business benefits. And we can go back to this too if we've got some questions. And I'm just going to wrap this up here by telling you guys a little bit more about how you can connect with us. We've got all sorts of training videos on our YouTube channel, training videos that include everything from integrating big data to emerging market data to trade spend analysis and category management. So there's a lot of information on that channel. We also have a very active blog, which is all training oriented. There's also various ways that you can follow us too. So Don, if you have other questions that have come through, I know some were coming through as we spoke.
Yes, I think we're pretty much out of time, but you certainly gave a variety of ways to connect with you, Kristy, in Relational Solutions. And I encourage you, listeners, if you have questions, call Janet up at the phone number on the screen or send her an email. I appreciate the presentation. It was a tremendous amount of detail that I'm sure all the attendees appreciated. Thank you both very much. Our next presentation will begin in about 4 minutes on the hour. I hope you can stay with us. This is John Karolowski signing off for Janet, Kristy at RIN Relational Solutions.